Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being there in today's edition of the program. And a special one, of course. Today is, we're celebrating National Unity Day. We continue talking about the national unity in Cameroon and the way things are. So in today's edition of the program, we are looking at the history of this National Day in Cameroon, the 20th of May. To talk to us tonight, we have Mr. Wuba Johnston. He is a pedagogue. He will talk to us about this date and the possible impact of this date to present-day Cameroon. Let us welcome our guest in this edition. Good evening, sir, and thank you for being there.
Good evening, Venasius. Thank you once more for inviting me to this precious program, and thanks to our viewers who are always with us.
And we'll begin by wishing you happy Unity Day.
Yes, thank you very much, and we hope that we'll be able to get the unity, because for now, unity is really suffering.
Unity is suffering.
Seriously.
That is why we are talking about the 20th of May in Cameroon. And we want to find out, what are we really celebrating this 20th of May? The history of this 20th of May. What are we celebrating?
My dear brother, to talk about the history of 20th May in Cameroon, it will be difficult for us to talk about it in isolation, to take straight from 20th May. But we need to look at the background history
that leads us to
this day,
yes,
which is 20th of May. And we find that Cameroon, before the partition of Africa, was one. During the Germans, it was one. And so, what you discover is that immediately after the First World War, the Europeans decided on the repartition of what belonged to Germany in particular. And unfortunately, Cameroon happened to have been one of the colonies of Germany. And the partition, from its onset, the UN, Britain and France started with their mischievous plans. They cannot explain to us why they did not divide the country equally today. The reason for dividing it to take the shape that it has today is best known to the three of them.
The UN, France
and Britain, the three of them. Because even if we're into what makes today, the three of them are the cause of everything. So we find that eventually we move from that period of that partition after the First World War. Eventually, what happens? The UN puts us under what they call the trusteeship system, with conditions that were defined very clear. We find them very clear in Resolution 1608, particularly paragraph 5. They are very clear, and we expected that should move on
as it was
planned by the UN itself, with the help of the UN Trusteeship Council. But unfortunately, we will move and find different things happening, because France, who is the architect of the mafia, had a Marshall Plan. This Marshall Plan was well programmed in a way that they had to move from negotiating the boundary between Britain and France in Cameroon, move to organizing a plebiscite with the help of the UN, the Fuman Conference, where only France was present, the one-party system, to finally land on the referendum. This is a Marshall Plan, which, as the present president of Cameroon declared in France, was aimed at annexation and assimilation of southern Cameroons.
Yes.
So, eventually, when you follow this, you find that before we talk about 20 May, we need to know about those things. That this was the procedure that was put in place, particularly by France, and then sustained by the UN and Britain. So the complicity of the UN and Britain is at all the stages. So the issue of 20th May was just another phase of the Marshall Plan of France.
Shufai, before we get, because you're already getting to the 20th of May, yes. But then, if you look at it, France and Britain decided to share, the spoils of the First World War. That was Cameroon, German Cameroon, and Britain took the part that they took, France took what they took. Now, what did it cost them to simply say that, no, we'll give it all to France or we'll give it all to Britain?
Well, they were all hungry. We know why there was a partition of Africa. It was for economic reasons.
Yes.
And so, whether the place was as small as what, everybody was fighting for it. And they fight to divide Cameroon instead of giving to one person. It's still a mafia between the UN, France, and Britain. What were they hunting for in Cameroon? You can see it today from what France is doing.
Oh, exactly.
Okay. So we find that interest, self-interest, is what is still animating the political scene till today. Well, we may be surprised to see that, but those who are reading deep into the documents find that France till today has maintained the same stance, the one of annexation and assimilation. They moved from what we call the referendum. There is the aftermath of the referendum because it didn't work the way they wanted. Eventually, they came with the 1984 decree, which was like the summit of their plan.
Yes.
But when Paul Biya went to France and declared that it has failed, the only thing they brought in is the genocide that we have today. So, we have the central role of France, but we take note that there is the complicity of these two people. When we get to 20th May itself, 20th May was orchestrated by what? 1961. There was the plebiscite. And when the plebiscite was done, it was a vote that involved uniquely the southern Cameroons.
To decide their fate.
They voted to decide their fate, either to join the already independent Federal Republic of Nigeria, or the already independent Republic of Cameroon
yes.
that got independence on the 1st of January 1960. These people got their independence without the southern Cameroons. And the southern Cameroon had to choose. And this was defined by the UN because it was supposed to culminate on the 1st of October 1961. And so, with this, they finished from the plebiscite and organized the Fuman Conference. At the Fuman Conference, it was...
That's already 1961.
Yeah, it's still in 1961. It was a mafia of the first order. Because the Fuman Conference was supposed to be a tripartite, we were supposed principally to involve the UN, Britain, and France, deciding on what was going to happen with the two people. The UN was absent. Britain was absent. And only France was there.
Yes.
What was the reason? It was a cooked plan by the trio. They have been working together from the beginning. And so in Fuman ended with no document signed. We have nothing signed today. Because Fuman was supposed to define the conditions of the implementation of
the union
as per Resolution 1608 and as per Article 76B of the UN Charter. But that was not the case because France came with already pre-prepared documents, as we have been seeing, because it's the very way Cameroon is ruled today. That is why you find that the consortium had to clash with the government because the consortium was presented a document for them only to sign, like it was done to Foncha and the other people in Fumban. And that's why it failed, because the people of today are already learned, they are aware of what happened, and they don't want to make the same mistakes. So, France came there with already a constitution in place, which was the Constitution of La République du Cameroun. And the Fonchas came with what they proposed. But the next day, it was already the implementation of what the French Cameroon had in hand, which was an automatic coup d'etat. And things moved very dramatically. Well, they went straight to the implementation of their constitution, but protest started immediately.
Immediately after the Fuman Constitution?
Immediately after the Fuman Constitution, because in April 1961, the Endelis were already in the UN to protest. Because the conditions that were supposed to be defined about the union were not put in place. They were obliged to go and protest. And their protests fell on deaf ears because the UN was an accomplice of France. And the consequences are very clear today. So eventually, what moved on? From 64, in 1966, Hajo moved straight to put an end to the multi-party system. And and they put in place only the unitary system.
Yes.
Which leads to what? Centralization, what has been in place till today. A centralized system of government where everything comes from one source, and that is from Yaoundé. And that is why you hear they tell us that when Yaoundé breathes, the country is alive. So it means that Cameroon is Yaoundé. As long as Yaoundé is fine, nothing is wrong. So, when he does this, what happens? He kills all the parties that existed in the democratic system that was in place in southern Cameroon.
Yes. The parties that went into Fuma.
Into Fuma.
Yes.
And he puts an end to those parties and eventually raises the next polemic, which is claiming that marginally the federal system that was put in place in Fumban is expensive.
Yes.
This was the Machiavellian moves coordinated by France, pushing the pen it had in hand, which was the president of Cameroon, to apply them. And eventually, what happens? He just starts preparing for what he calls a referendum, because he declares that managing the two systems is a complicated system. So what happens next? We hear now that there is going to be a referendum. And when the referendum is coming, it is concerning the two people. A referendum on what? Big question. Because the Fuman constitution, they said it was not supposed to be tampered with.
Yes.
And somebody is tampering with,
without the consent, even the knowledge of the other people.
Whether there was no knowledge, but the UN was aware and paid a deaf ear, because it was France's Marshall Plan that they were aware of. So, this was in gross violation of what was already in place. And eventually, the referendum came in place on the 20th of May 1972, where not only the Southern Cameroonians who voted now. So it was another coup d'etat. And that's why you find that most of our writers describe it as a civilian coup d'etat. Because the civilians were used to overturn the tables. It was already clear that we will respect the federal system. We will remain two states with equal status and autonomy. Two key words. Equal status and autonomy.
Yes.
So, the French plan was moving on gradually and being realized step by step with the help of the Cameroon government. When the referendum is organized now, they know that Southern Cameroons is a third of the country's population. French Cameroon is 2/3. The results were already clear before the elections.
Yes.
So it was a masquerade. And that is why you get results of 99.9%. And you find that all this is done before the eyes of the whole world. The so-called the Security Council, the so-called the UN, they watch how this is being realized. Reason why we call them an accomplice in this Marshall Plan put in place by France, using the government of Cameroon to realize it. The 20th of May referendum, as we call it, has many things to be questioned. Right? To what was put in place, which was the we and the yes option. That was an advantage over what they had first played on. From the first days, the Francophones know nothing about English, the Anglophones knew nothing about French.
Yes.
So when they take we, they explain to the Francophones that it means that you are accepting. So the opposite is no. The opposite is yes.
Of course.
In that context. And the Anglophones understand that when you say yes, you are for it. When you say we, you are against.
Yes.
And so that was one of the factors that was used. And they brought out the results which they already expected.
But Shufai, there's something we call intellectual honesty.
Here we have the intellectual dishonesty.
Correct. Because these people, they should have some kind of apology to render to history.
The people to be put first to question are the so-called UN.
Yes.
These questions are supposed to be validated by them. How can the votes or the cards for voting be carrying by we and
yes.
And yes, we mean the same thing. It is the very thing they did during the plebiscite. Instead of giving the three options as per Resolution 1608, paragraph 5, they gave two. So, the UN has taken time to violate its own let-down principles. In the case of Southern Cameroons alone, because up to now, they don't have another trust territory, which is in this situation.
Okay.
And yet, the UN is playing serious silence as far as the issue is concerned. All they do is talk, and they don't act. So, after the referendum took place, brought the results that brought, and what were the consequences?
That is where we should be going now.
The immediate consequences on
part 2 to question 2, which is the impact of this date.
The immediate consequences on the spot was what? That Cameroon embraced a unitary system, what they call today the unitary state. Well, those who were there from the plebiscite saw the cracks on the wall the very day that this foundation is being built on sinking sand.
Yes.
And the cracks are enlarging to present day. And we are seeing an imminent collapse of this building that was built in 1961. Because its collapse is imminent. Because no efforts are put in place to reinforce. Nothing. So, present day, the effects of 28 May are glaring. The effects are what? The consequences are a gradual disintegration
of the country.
And it's going gradually in the hands of the government. And they are watching how the country is disintegrating. We find it in daily day activities. You get what we're having in hand, which is the Anglophone crisis or war. When you get to its own history, you find that the history of this comes from immediately from 1961, because the process started from 1961.
Okay.
The Anglophones have been contesting from 1961. It is not a new thing.
It did not start in 2016.
No, it's not a new thing. 2016 was just the apex of the whole thing. When the whole thing ignited and took another page, it was after the presidential decree of 1984, where President Paul Biya decided single-handedly to remove the word united, as Ahidjo removed the 1 star. But Ahidjo played a trick through a referendum to remove the 1 star. But he used his pen to remove the word united. Removing united brought back Cameroon to the name La République du Cameroun, which is the original name of the East Cameroon when they got their independence. And so, if we were to accuse people of secession, we will first accuse him of secession, because he was the first person who decided to separate from the union by bringing himself back to the other name.
To the name that existed in 1960.
Exactly. He's telling the other partner to go. I don't need you. And that is when there was the start of the AAC 1 and 2, which was the beginning of protest. And when the divide and rule system was brought in Bamenda in AAC 2, it gave birth to the SCNC, SCAPO, and other things.
Yes. Some people think that the date we are celebrating that we call National Unity, National Unity Day, that was not the day Cameroon was united.
We should be very, very honest to say that Cameroon is one of the rare countries in Africa, the colonial states, that celebrates National Day on the day they never had independence.
Correct.
We are one of the rare countries. The 2 independent days of independence in Cameroon are 1st of January 1960 for La République du Cameroun and the 1st of October 1961 for Southern Cameroons. If they were to find a date somewhere which is different, it would have been the 11th of February 1961.
Yes.
Where Southern Cameroons voted to join La République du Cameroun.
Yes.
But unfortunately, history has been distorted. And Cameroonians have been untaught, and children continue to be untaught, Because children are taught that 11 February is the youth day. And when you ask, what did the youth do on youth day for the day to be called youth day, there is no answer. They refuse to call it plebiscite day, because when you call plebiscite, you have to explain the history.
Yes.
And when you explain the history, it will bring more questions.
Yes.
So the Cameroon history is distorted, officially distorted, and Cameroonians are untaught the history of Cameroon. You see, even in the Francophone subsystem, history and geography are downplayed on. Right to the second, they treat history and geography as one subject. Histoire, Geo. And it's optional.
If you want, you study. If you don't want.
But because those are things that are going to enlighten them to know what Cameroon history is and what the geography of Cameroon is. But those things are distorted deliberately. It is not an accident. So these things are having their consequences. But unfortunately, the generation of today has access to information that nobody can tamper with. And it permits every Dick, Tom, and Harry to know the right history. And that is why there is a flora of resistance groups that are doing everything possible to denounce. Writers are writing endlessly. People are defending theses only on this to prove that the UN Trusteeship Council, that they failed in the implementation of Resolution 1608, paragraph 5, as per the case of Southern Cameroons. Because when they compare the case of Southern Cameroon with that of British Togoland, it is a paradox that the very world organization called UN applies a different measure here and applies another one here, what the Frenchman calls deux poids, deux mesures. So it tells us that the UN, France, and Britain had an original plan against Southern Cameroonians.
Okay.
And so on the last day, the three of them are the first people who are supposed to account for the souls that are being lost in Southern Cameroon and the suffering that people are going through.
Okay. Given where we are, given all this, I call it injustice, all these lapses that you have enumerated, are we condemned? Is there any way forward?
We are not condemned. That is why we are talking about the UN revisiting its own charter, Article 76B, revisiting Resolution 1608, paragraph 5 of the UN General Assembly. The conditions were already defined there. They cannot force us. Today, the UN is busy forcing Gibraltar, is forcing Toledo law to separate from New Zealand. They are organized in each country twice, a referendum twice in the two countries. And the people have said we prefer the status quo.
Yes.
Want to remain with their colonial master.
Yes.
Why should they be giving them that offer and refusing to Southern Cameroonians?
Yes.
It comes again to confirm that the UN is part of this Marshall Plan to get the Southern Cameroonians as sacrificial lamb. And that is why, whether they die in which numbers, the UN has taken no resolution. They are silent.
Okay, that is the part of the UN. For us Cameroonians, we are the people dying. We are the people suffering. Like somebody said, the effect of the ongoing crisis that we have is not only in the two English regions, it is affecting the whole country. Is there anything Cameroon as a nation plagued by all this? Is there anything that Cameroon can do to save the situation while waiting for UN whenever they would decide?
As it concerns Cameroon, keeping aside the colonial masters,
yes,
Cameroon is suffering from the problem of a political will. We know how this happened when President Pobia came back from Ivory Coast. And then Simaleng Airport, he arrived when they had written a document and it was handed to him and he read, "I declare war." He's the supreme being in Cameroon. Everything remains in his hand. To get up one morning and say, "I declare a ceasefire," that's the level of the Cameroon. But what they do is they siphon funds from the COVID money to buy more arms and send to someone. It means that they don't have the political will is not there to put an end to the crisis. The government is manifesting very clearly they don't have any interest. We have been witnesses of the fact that other world organizations have supported Cameroon to rebuild, reconstruct, and put in a budget. But the Cameroon government and its forces are burning more villages. Up to the day when now that we're talking, villages are being burnt. In places like Kumbu, villages are being burnt down. It means that the government does not have any aim to put an, because if we had an aim, we will not hear of burning again.
Okay.
You cannot talk of reconstruction while you are destroying at the same time.
Okay.
It's a paradox.
If you discover that in this crisis, there are two fronts. We have those, the other side facing the military facing this, the secessionists, those who are fighting for their own independence. Do they have a part to play from that other end?
They don't lack their part. The first problem is that before we get to their part, we have to know that every person has a right to self-determination. As per the UN Charter. And when you push a people to the wall, it leads to that.
Yes.
Because the Cameroon government should carry the responsibility for pushing those voices in the bushes to be at the state where they are. If they are picked up arms, how did they start? It was a simple manifestation on the 1st of October 2016 that was poorly handled because excessive force was used. And it did not end on that day. It continued. And the next thing was that they had to try to resist and defend themselves. And we are where we are today. The arms that they have in hand, some of the arms is the state that is sponsoring because they go with arms and they seize them.
And then turn back
and use them on the state. So the Amber Boys, as they are generally called, they have their own their contribution is what? The way they have handled the civilian population, particularly. Because at one moment they were more violent on the civilian population, and that's what has chased some of the people out of southern Cameroon. They would have still been there, but they were chased out because their own brothers became more violent on them. That violence has led to the death of some of the civilians. Some were kidnapped, some had to pay ransom, many lost their lives, many left and went as refugees. Some are internally displaced persons. That is their own contribution.
Okay.
And they also killed, because they have cases of killings.
Okay.
When it comes to killing of soldiers, those are two warring factions, and those are collaterals of a war. What I pity are the civilian who are suffering innocently.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Buba Justin. It was, we needed this history to let us know we are talking about national unity, and if we should talk about unity, we should know where we are, where we left, where we are, and where we are going to.
Yes, where we are going to. That's why I wanted to end by saying that there is going to be no solution to this thing until we accept dialogue, genuine dialogue, and revisit all the agreements that took place before 1961.
Thank you so much for being there.
You're welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is all we had for today's edition of the program. We'll continue talking about national unity and its implication in the life of the country. Up next will be the news in the English language. Until we meet again, goodbye, good night.